Welcome to this edition of the Awakening Women podcast. In this episode, we're talking about something I haven't really addressed a whole lot on the podcast because, as you know, I don't really attach to a lot of the typical stuff that you see out there talking about narcissistic abuse and toxic relationships. However, you are probably familiar if you've been in the space of studying and taking in content about it of a term called the trauma bond. And I see it as I see it differently, and I want to share my own spin-off on it. And I may be saying some of similar things, just maybe in a different way. And I know for me, I used to not really, I didn't really resonate with that, even when I may have very well been experiencing that, right? And it's important to me that I'm not just regurgitating and parroting what everybody else is saying online. Before I dive into this, I want to direct you to something I'm doing in December, if this at all resonates with you about what we're going to get into here. The Relationship Clarity Bootcamp, I'm running it again December 2nd to the 7th before the Christmas craziness hits. And I'm also doing a live class on that Friday, the 6th, called Transforming Trauma Binds, not Trauma Bonds. And we'll get into where that play on words comes from and from my personal interpretation and opinion of it. So you will take part in the pre-recorded bootcamp series and participate in the daily challenges around those. And then we'll meet live for the class on December 6th at 12 p.m. Pacific Standard Time to dive into transforming these traumatic attachments. So before I dive into that, I want to really encapsulate what it is to have a bind to something. All right. This is more than just something that's not working and you can't seem to leave it. There is some really deep soul level emotional enmeshments that happen in these relationships. And women, we need to take responsibility for the unhealed parts of ourselves that intertwines in this type of attachment, bond, bind, whatever you want to call it. And we need to heal ourselves so that that type of thing would no longer even be something we would tolerate. And yes, you do to some level need to break the bind, break that entanglement, break that attachment to have the clarity to step back and go, holy my God, what did I put up with for all those years or decades? When you're in it, you don't necessarily see it. And that's why when I work with women who are in these relationships, we just take a reset, we take a break, and I guide them. How do you do that? They're not ready to make that full and final decision to cut things off and leave. That's why they come to me. Once you get to that place, you're on your way. There's a lot that's coming for you at that point. But once you're there, you're on your way to breaking free. Now, the other point to that is if you don't heal those parts I just talked about, the chances of you rebounding into another similar relationship are very, very high and very likely. So first of all, I want to talk about what is a bind. So it is defined as to tie tightly, where you cohere in a single mass, to stick together, to fasten to something with a bond. And that is how I see it. It is a very intertwined bond that you're binded to. It's like women cannot see the forest through the trees. They cannot see what is actually happening because it's so close in front of their eyes. They need to create some emotional distance, maybe some physical distance, some psychological distance to get that clarity. And that's exactly what I teach you how to do in my program and the cycle. I'm going to go into some of that in the bootcamp to help you see where you are in the 5 levels of awakening, because to move through this toxic bind, you need to be able to move up the awakening scale and move up the ladder, because you'll never be ready to do anything about it if you're staying trapped at one particular level and you keep doing the same things changing maybe a few behaviors or reading more books or listening to more podcasts, as you can see, that doesn't actually equate to anything changing on the outside. And if it did, then you wouldn't be in this situation, right? And so I want to show you on a deeper level how this actually happens. I've been doing this work. I've worked with a lot of women. I've been doing this for 6 years now, specifically in the area of narcissistic abuse survivors and women who are in these relationships, very much intertwined and entangled in them so tightly that they can't even see anything clearly. Everything is confusing. And so we need to create some psychological and emotional distance to help you get that clarity. So again, get into the boot camp if you would like my help with that to get started. And then the next level is obviously joining my mentorship program. So I want to talk about too, when we're talking about emotional binds, the rights that we have as human beings when it comes to our emotional boundaries and our emotional integrity and our ability to stand on our own emotionally. We need to be able to do this. And this is the reason why we end up in these bad situations, because we are emotionally dependent. We need to learn how to become emotionally independent so that we know that we have the right to express ourselves. There's no fear around expressing ourselves. There's no, oh, I might lose this person if I express myself, or that person might blow up if I express myself. Because if you are doing that from the very beginning, people are going to show themselves to you. They're going to show you who they are. But what happens in these situations is we say something once, they blow up, it turns into a big fight, or maybe it's a few times this happens. And eventually you go into laying on your back. I give up. It's best just to not say anything. And that really increases the learned helplessness and increases the feeling of being victimized and keeping you in that victim identity. So here are some rights that we all have when it comes to our emotional integrity and our emotional freedoms, is to feel free to express ourselves. That doesn't mean to emotionally vomit and unconsciously put your emotions on someone else. That means that you take some time to get some clarity on what is actually going on for you, and you express it in a conscious, non-blaming way that is all about your experience, the impact on you. It doesn't belittle the other person, it doesn't criticize the other person, and if it does, it's done in a very tactful, loving way. So when I'm saying express, it doesn't mean yelling, screaming, reacting from your triggers. Expressing means, this is how this landed for me. This is how I feel about this particular issue. And you have that freedom to do that. Now, we all have that freedom. But what we end up doing is we deny it and we abandon ourselves when we are learning that someone that we are expressing to isn't listening. They don't care. They're only interested in their own ego. They're only interested in being right. They're only interested in proving you wrong or arguing or making you forget about the first point that you brought up in the first place. And so if you don't feel free to express, then you are in a very toxic bind. If you feel like you can't say what is true for you because of the repercussions. The second is emotional safety, and it ties into that, where it doesn't mean it's not hard for you to speak up, but you don't feel afraid because how the other person is going to react. And it might not be a reaction that's a big blow up, but maybe you're used to the person going silent, going quiet, and abandoning you that way. And it triggers your abandonment wounds because they don't say anything back, or they shut down and just go blank, or they get up and they walk away or reject you because you are sharing how you feel. You can't have emotional safety with someone who does those types of things, and with someone who makes you feel like you're the problem because you have a problem with something they did. We also have the freedom to feel separately from other. That means that I'm allowed to have my feelings about health, wellness, spirituality, political stuff, sexuality, lifestyle, all of those things. I have a right to hold my own opinions and so do you. And that doesn't mean that because we have differing opinions that the other gets to belittle and degrade the other person for their beliefs. And a lot of times when we end up in these toxic binds, we end up enmeshing and being, like we just talked about, the cohesion, becoming one, where it's like, I don't even know what I think, feel, want, desire, like, dislike, hate. We don't even know, because we have not learned how to stand on our own emotionally, to have our own thoughts, to have our own beliefs and our own views. And I know this is true because every single woman I work with, when they're doing this work in my program, they get stumped as to how to feel. They don't have the ability to really feel what's going on internally. And then the next is we have the freedom to have our own perceptions. My perception, that doesn't always mean that the perceptions we have are accurate, because our perceptions are often made up of past programming and things that we have been through, and everything is interpretation, right? Everything that we see, think, read, someone says is up for our interpretation based on our inner programming, our belief systems, all of that, our identity. There's so much wrapped up in what our perceptions and our interpretations are. But we all have a right to have our own perceptions, opinions, and views. And nobody gets to shut you down, belittle you, or make you wrong for those. And this is something that we all see. We've all seen it recently with the whole political climate. Everybody has their stance and the other one is always wrong. That's all it is. I like to meet in the middle with things and see that there are sides to everything. That's always how I have operated. And I don't believe in taking one particular stance and then separation of, you are the idiots over here, you don't know what you're talking about. And that I just cannot stand. And there are so many people talking about freedoms and having freedoms about things, and then they are the one taking away the freedom of others, or trying to, at least, the freedom of others to express their views and what they believe and what they think and their opinions and all of that. So just notice, when you do that, you're taking away other people's freedoms, and then you're going to have your freedoms taken from you. So we have to it starts within us, right? Going a little bit off in a little bit of a different direction, but we all have the freedom we should have the freedom, and we do have it, to have our own perceptions and our own opinions and our own views. And then the last freedom I'll touch on here is the freedom from emotional manipulation. And this means guilt, coercive control, coercion, making you feel badly, belittling you, twisting events to muddy the water of what actually is happening. So if you really think about gaslighting and you think about the emotional manipulation that you have experienced, it's taking away your right to have clarity. And so you join with that and you're like, okay, I'm going to go into your reality over here and allow my brain to become scrambled, and my clarity is gone that I originally had, that this thing that you said or did not feel good. And now I'm confused. Now I'm hurt. Now I am just feeling completely twisted around because I went into your reality instead of staying in my own. And so we can't blame the other person fully. We have to be able to notice where we leave ourselves and we leave our reality and go into someone else's, and then we lose our own opinions, our own beliefs. And that doesn't mean that sometimes things won't maybe open up for us if you're talking with someone and they're sharing theirs and you're like, yeah, I could see that a little bit, or yeah, I could see that. I join with that. And yeah, I do agree with you on that. That's a very good point. But we're not completely leaving ourselves to step into that other reality. We're not leaving our own sense of clarity and knowing to go into, oh, now I'm confused. Now you've got me wondering who's what and what's what. And if my knee is my elbow, like I allowed you to do that to me. And yes, it is. It's allowing. Once you're aware, especially, that this stuff is going on, you can stop allowing it. And there are so many ways in order to do that. And these are some of the ways that you can start to create some emotional distance to break that traumatic binding that you have, this emotional entanglement that you have in this relationship. So here are some of the things that create a trauma bind. And as you've probably heard, trauma bond. It's a survival attachment. It's how a person becomes emotionally tied to another for the sake of survival or coping with trauma. It is a pain-driven loyalty, and it's a sense of loyalty that develops through shared suffering or mutual pain. That doesn't, that's, you've probably heard that before, and that doesn't mean that you're not going to go through hard times as a couple, but this is more about, it's the loyalty and the bond is driven more through mutual and shared suffering and pain. It's a wound-rooted connection. It comes from the emotional wounds that create a deep and unhealthy connection. So we have to take ownership of our deep, unhealthy, unhealed emotional wounds. It is also a conflict-induced bond, and it occurs through repeated conflict or emotional distress. And then oftentimes what happens there that really binds it is that the person that is hurting you and causing the drama, causing the chaos, comes in and swoops in and makes it all better, smooths it over, acts like nothing happened, starts being the doting husband and father, and is, acting like Mr. Wonderful after just treating you horribly. And so you have this inner conflict that happens with this over time. It's also a stress-induced dependence because this bond forms due to the constant stress and dependence on the other person, which is the abuser, for stability. It is also a coercive attachment. This bond arises under manipulative or coercive circumstances. And emotional enmeshment. This is the entanglement of emotions in a relationship that causes difficulty in distinguishing personal boundaries due to shared trauma or some kind of bond in there that you have that makes you think that you are working with your soulmate or something. But it's not healthy when that entanglement or that connection is all about pain. There should be lots of happiness, laughter, pleasure, connection, conversations, and companionship and alignment. There should be a lot more of that than anything to do with pain and trauma at all in a relationship. A relationship should not be traumatizing, by the way. It's also this suffering sink, right? It's two people that may become emotionally in tune due to shared suffering. It's a fear-based connection because this bond is driven by mutual fear or emotional insecurity. Lastly, it is a toxic reliance that is an unhealthy dependence formed through shared trauma. So this comes up when both people have these past traumas that are coming out through you being the one on the receiving end and them being the quote-unquote perpetrator or initiator of the abuse, and you are participating in it through your own wounding. I was trying to really put some deep concepts into this today, so sorry if it kind of has felt a little bit less smooth than normal. I have been just diving deeper into more of the materials that I'm teaching in the program and going deeper into the psychology, into my roots of counseling psychology, and also into looking at our identity and at our identity level around how do we see ourselves? Because if you are in one of these relationships, then that is coming from your current level of identity. And so we have to change that through doing different things, being someone totally different. Really, that's what it comes down to. So if this resonates with you and you want to do the deeper work, you don't want to just keep listening to more podcasts and reels on narcissistic abuse signs and all of that, and you want to actually do this work, you're ready to change. This really is for you if you're ready to change. If you're not ready to transform your life, then there's no sense even bothering to sign up for my boot camp. It is for those who are ready to look in the mirror and get honest with themselves and do some real work. If you'd like to sign up, head to the description in this episode show notes and you'll find the link to join us inside. All right, that wraps up this episode and I'll chat with you in the next one. Bye for now.